These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Bryce Newskit, and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. We are coming to you from the Nebraska FFA Convention right here inside Pinnacle Bank Arena in downtown Lincoln. There has been certainly a buzz in the air as FFA members gather from all corners of the state for this year's main event. On today's show, of course, we'll be shining a bright light on these future leaders of the agriculture industry involved in FFA. We're also going to delve into some of the factors behind rising ag land values across the state. Plus, we'll hear from an Iowa State economist who shared some insights into the latest happenings when it comes to the hog market. But let's kick off today's show right here inside PBA, as this week Lincoln has certainly transformed from a sea of red to a sea of blue as we celebrate the 96th Nebraska FFA Convention. Officials tell us that over 7,000 students from across the state are attending this year's event, and these FFA members spent the past year preparing for competitions and qualifying for state convention at the district level. And of course, we have the general sessions taking place right behind me, as each session is hosted by a pair of state FFA officers. Earlier, we had the pleasure of speaking with one of those state FFA officers, that is State Vice President Keetyn Valentine. Joining us now is Keetyn Valentine. She hails from the David City FFA chapter, this year serving as Nebraska FFA State Vice President. And Keetyn, I want to learn more about your background in the agriculture industry that ultimately led you down this path where you're serving now.
Yeah, of course. So my background is a little bit different than many. My parents are from North Dakota, so they both grew up on a farm up in North Dakota, but they're in education. So we moved to David City, and I started getting into agriculture by raising chickens in my backyard. And so that was my SAE project, and I continued that on, and it really led to a passion today.
So how did you first get involved with this organization, the Nebraska FFA, that ultimately led you to wanting to run for state FFA office?
Yes, exactly. My mom was very involved in FFA and 4-H, and so she was kind of an inspiration in that way of being a part of the organization, but also then at the same time being able to get those leadership opportunities from support from my advisors and other members also as well was huge.
You've had a busy year serving as state FFA office, but an exciting aspect is that the association continues to grow. Remind me where we sit today. How many members and chapters are there across the Cornhusker State?
Yes, there are 12,000, nearly 12,000 FFA members and over 214 chapters, which is awesome.
Part of your experience this past year has been visiting some of those chapters through chapter visits. What did you personally learn from that?
I got to learn so many things. The biggest thing for me was definitely how each chapter was different and each in their own way, but still was able to grow and had support from so many other people.
Okay. You and your teammates are going to hang your jackets up later this week as you will retire from this position. How do you hope that this year will propel you with your future in the ag industry, Keetyn?
This definitely gave me a lot of opportunities, whether that was in business and industry tours, creating those relationships in those, and also alongside with the ag teachers and with the students as well. So the relationship side was huge, and that will continue to prosper as the years continue.
Thanks to Keetyn for joining us here on the broadcast. As I mentioned, this year's state officer team will be wrapping up their year of service this weekend. To watch an exclusive interview with the new team, I invite you to visit the website ruralradionetwork.com over the weekend. Moving forward, let's talk about something that's pretty crucial. With 1 in every 3 people in the state employed in agriculturally based careers, the career development events offered by FFA are pretty important. The events aim to help students hone their abilities to think critically, communicate clearly, and perform effectively in an ever-challenging job market. Here with us today to shed a light on these events is Matt Kreifels. Let's talk about all the blue jackets that kind of take over East Campus for these 3 days. They're there to do contests, and I'm sure there are a lot of logistics involved in that, right?
Oh, yes. I drove across East Campus this morning before stopping out here, and Blue Jackets are definitely filling the sidewalks and streets on East Campus. We're excited to have them, especially since they'll be participating in 20 different what we call career development events, which are the technical agriculture skill and knowledge competitions that we have during the FFA convention.
As I mentioned, a lot of those events are hosted on East Campus, but what is the university's involvement with having those events take place?
Yes, the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources, located on East Campus, is the host for these events. We coordinate all 20 of them that take place during the convention. 18 of them are on East Campus, and then there's one that's out at Sand Hill Global Event Center, and then also at Southeast Community College.
I'm sure it has to be a pretty good recruiting event for the university to have all those students seeing some of the facilities as part of campus, right?
We love having those Blue Jackets, those students on campus, because they represent not only the future of agriculture, but the future leaders that we hope to recruit to agriculture careers and the college itself. We're expecting, or actually there are 4,300, a little more than 4,300 students that are registered to participate in those 20 competitions, over 800 teams from 207 schools across the state of Nebraska. We're happy to have them with us.
Can you give an example, Matt, of perhaps what are those 20 career development events and how that's preparing students for some of these careers available in the ag industry today?
Yes. Well, of the 20 career development events, we range across the agricultural industry and across the career pathways. So we have students that do the traditional livestock evaluation and judging, all the way to floral design, to welding, to marketing plan, which is an agribusiness competition, and meats evaluation. It really spans the industry. And what these competitions do is provide an opportunity for them to demonstrate what they've been learning all throughout the last school year here in Lincoln as kind of a capstone experience to what they've been learning locally in their high school agricultural education programs and FFA chapters.
That's a good point. I want to talk about those classroom activities, and part of your role as part of the University of Nebraska Lincoln is preparing future teachers to head out across the state of Nebraska and fill some of those roles. We always talk about FFA continues to grow in the state of Nebraska over the years, but with that, need more and more ag teachers. Talk about that role.
Well, yes, I'm in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication, and we are the department within the college and within the university that prepares future high school agriculture teachers. We've seen a tremendous need for teachers for, probably 2 decades or better. But in the last few years, particularly in the last 3 years, we've seen those numbers and the demand for that surge. And we need more students to consider teaching agriculture, and that's one of the messages that we're here to share today with students during the convention.
Sounds like students that are studying that, they have opportunities waiting for them even before their senior year.
Yes, we have some students that accept a job, they sign a contract a year ahead of the school year that they signed the contract for. So before they student teach, before they're done with us on campus, they're already getting approached by superintendents and principals across the state of Nebraska and beyond to say, hey, we know we're going to need an ag teacher, will you be ours? And it's pretty remarkable situation for them to be in, knowing that there's such a high demand for their skill set.
A lot of programs looking to add a second teacher. It seems like there's also opportunities not just in rural areas of the state, but more urban, perhaps Lincoln, Omaha areas looking to add FFA and ag education too.
Yeah, Lincoln and Omaha both advertised for a high school agriculture teacher this last year. Thankfully, both of them filled their positions. We've seen 53 openings across the state of Nebraska from Class D school districts to Class A, our largest school districts in the state. And of those 53 openings, there are still 19 that are open, and unfortunately we're out of student teachers. So schools that are still looking for teachers are either going to steal someone from a neighboring school perhaps, which doesn't solve the problem, or they might attract someone from out of state, or they can utilize one of the alternative certification pathways that exists for teachers to enter teaching from, say, an ag career.
Thanks to Matt for stopping by to discuss those educational opportunities for students as well as the shortage when it comes to future ag educators. As you heard, it certainly takes a big effort to make those career development events all come together during the convention, and thank you to all the volunteers making it happen. Switching gears now, let's dive into the markets. As we wrapped up 2023, the president of the Nebraska Pork Producers Association shared with me that producers were facing worse market conditions, even tougher than those experienced back in 1998. Those involved in the pork industry, you know how challenging those late 1990s were. But here's the good news. Conditions have been looking up over the first quarter of 2024. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to discuss that turnaround with Iowa State University ag economist Schulz. Let's take a listen to our conversation. Well, about a week and a half or so ago, we had the hogs and pigs report come out. Let's first take a look at the nationwide numbers. What did that report tell us, Lee?
Well, I would say in general in line with expectations. Overall, we did see numbers tighten. Maybe they were a little bit on the larger side of the decline in numbers. So if anything, the report was neutral to maybe slightly bearish. But when you look at where we're at as far as the breeding herd, we continue to see some contraction there. We were down 2.1%. Farrowing numbers for December, February down 2.8%. The big shocker in the report was the productivity or pigs saved per litter. That was up 4.6%. So even though we're seeing fewer sows, fewer farrowings, we had a larger pig crop by 1.9%. And so that showed us that as we get into the summer, the hog supplies will be a little bit larger than maybe we anticipated prior to this report.
Lee, when it comes to that report, they give state-specific information. I asked you if you had a chance to look into the Nebraska numbers, and you've got some of those you can share with us today, right?
When you looked at the Nebraska numbers, they bucked a bit of that trend. So when the breeding herd was up 3.8%, sows farrowing were up 2.8%, and actually Nebraska had the third largest pig saved per litter increase at 7.6%. So their pig crop was up over 10%, almost 11% year over year increase. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind we're always comparing to that base year ago level. So overall larger changes can be a bit indicative of both what it compared to a year ago, but also what the current situation is in Nebraska. So looking at this report, we did see a bit of expansion overall at those Nebraska numbers. Now, I think part of that is I think we're seeing a bit of stabilization in the supplies as we're seeing economic conditions improve.
Okay, speaking of that, as we look back at the charts over the first quarter here of 2024, things are really challenging entering the new year. Visiting with some of the Nebraska pork producers, talking about how challenging these pork conditions are raising pigs in these economic conditions just were. But that has rebounded a little bit. Talk about the factors leading to why that is.
It's certainly been a needed rebound. As we've looked since the turn of the year, we're up roughly $14 per hundredweight. And when you compare that to dollars per head, that's roughly up $25 to $30 per head, really since the beginning of the year. And that's provided a lot of optimism. I think you have to really look at being a demand-driven market. We've seen domestic demand stabilize in the fourth quarter of 2023, and I think there's been some positive signals of stronger domestic demand. Export demand has really continued to outperform maybe our expectations. So far, we're up 9% year over year in exports. USDA has us up roughly 5% for the year. So that demand has really been a supportive, and especially compared it to supply. So supplies, you could argue, have actually been larger than expected. So the supply is weighing on the market. The demand has really provided that optimism and been a real driver as we look at the increase over the first 3 months or so of the year.
Well, let me ask you this, Lee. It's never good when the coffee shop chatter is how much guys are losing on pigs per head out the door when they're finishing them off. But at this point, as we have seen some of those prices rebound, are those finishing pigs, are they in a profitable territory just yet, or are they still kind of behind?
We're knocking on the door. So as we've left 2023 behind us, the worst year financially that I've ever measured when we were looking at the Iowa State estimated returns model, producers roughly losing $32 per head. Now, as we get into 2024, my model shows April is break even for the average pork producer, and then looking at possibly a string of profits as we get into May, June, July, and August, with some of the highest profitable levels being in June and July. For the year, my estimates suggest we're roughly break even. And so that has really been a significant change from 2023, but also a significant change from what we expected 2024 to look like. Earlier in the year, I had projected losses of $15 to $20 per head. Again, we're now looking at possibly break-even levels with some relatively strong profits as we get into the summer months.
Yeah, pretty neat resource there. Want to get your thoughts here, big picture. We look at the industry because some of these challenging times. You penned a kind of a publication, a letter out there talking about tough times could push more structural changes in the hog industry. What changes could we see on the horizon?
Well, I think it's important to separate kind of longer term trends and changes that we've seen. Also with possible implications of the financial situation that producers have faced. So, for example, we've seen continued growth in contracting. So if you go back to roughly the early 2000s, we were in that about 30% of hogs were under contract production. We're over 50% today. And so that's been a longer term trend that maybe we could see continue to elevate a little bit. We've seen some growth in the percent contracted over the last several years. I wouldn't say it reduces risk, but it does change risk for both contract growers as well as integrators in the market. Another change we've seen over time is, and I'll point to the recent Census of Agriculture with where we have 2022 data, we've seen fewer farms. So depending on how you measure it, both operations with inventory or operations with sales, we're down roughly 5,000 to 8,000 operations from 2017 to 2022. Now the challenging conditions of 2023 likely did see some further contraction in the industry, but that's further much more of an ongoing trend that we've continued to see. Now as we look at more recent events and structural changes, we've seen the announcement of the plant here in Perry, Iowa, being closed permanently starting in June of this year. And so that's a change to the packing capacity. And if you look back to fall of 2021, we've seen a reduction in packing capacity of roughly 6% nationally now with the closure of several plants. So that could be an adjustment we're seeing in the industry as inventory numbers have started to peak. And we're now starting to see some contraction in packing capacity. And why I point to that is that has both implications longer term, but also implications shorter term, especially as we get into the fourth quarter of the year, and we may start to bump up against that capacity as we have larger hog supplies and a fixed level of capacity.
My thanks to Lee and his team for their insights and his contributions this week. Looking ahead to next week, we're excited to announce that we'll be joined by Jeff Peterson. Of course, he is the president of Heartland Farm Partners. And remember, if you've ever missed one of our market segments, you can always catch up by watching it on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you've not done so already. From the iconic big rib to the delectable flat iron steak, the University of Nebraska, especially the meat laboratory on East Campus, boasts a long history of meat innovation. And the exciting part is this innovation train is not slowing down anytime soon. With hands-on opportunities and a vast networking platform, the university provides students with a perfect environment to acquire training needed to make a lasting impact in meat science. Curious to learn more about these cutting-edge meat innovations? Well, be sure to check out the latest issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time for a quick weather update with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, producers starting to get a bit anxious in portions of the state about getting into the fields for the upcoming growing season. But as you move into April, there's always those chances of April showers leading to May flowers. You got some of those in your forecast?
Well, thanks, Bryce. I actually have some good news for those that are actually wanting to get out in the fields here to get some work, get some planting in here by the middle of April. Speaking of those April showers, this area of low pressure moving into Nebraska on Saturday is going to give a good chance of moisture for a good portion of the state, the exception probably being parts of southwestern Nebraska. But the Panhandle, there's going to be a pretty good period of rain starting Saturday into Sunday. There's probably even going to be some snowfall, kind of Shatter and Harrison, maybe even as far south as Scotts Bluff into Sunday. As we get to the eastern half of the state, though, we are going to be looking at probably a 2 to 4 hour window between Saturday afternoon and early Sunday morning, with chances for some heavier showers. The SPC right now, as of Thursday, is kind of keeping this area in a marginal risk. There is going to be some chance for severe weather, but right now the instability and just the moisture return isn't probably going to be quite sufficient enough to get a really big severe weather outbreak, and that's perfectly okay. We could use some moisture. We don't need the hail and the really high winds. Although with the high winds, though, on Saturday we are going to be seeing some pretty strong winds from the south. Winds could gust up to 45, 50 miles an hour. Again, I think these storms will not be producing the 100-mile-an-hour straight line winds. In terms of total precipitation in the next 5 days or going into early next week, again, highest precipitation amounts are expected in the northwestern part of the Panhandle. Some of this likely will be snow. A pretty good chance at least a half inch of moisture across eastern Nebraska. The wild card will be with that low kind of exactly where it goes once it leaves Nebraska. If it actually moves a little bit more slowly and sort of cuts off over, say, south central South Dakota, there will be a period on Sunday where we do actually have some wraparound moisture. So we do expect some additional showers, particularly across the northern portion of the state on Sunday. I think by Monday we'll be back in the clear. And then our attention later next week turns toward this trough of low pressure, which will be moving in from the west coast into Texas. If this ends up being a little bit further toward the north than what is currently forecast, then I do think we will have a pretty good chance of precipitation across particularly the southern and eastern thirds of the state. Right now, it looks like we're probably going to miss out on that. And with this stronger ridging building into the west, this will be moving into the central and eastern portion of the U.S. as we head toward later portion next week. And right now, the CPC is showing it being quite warm as we head into the second and third weeks of April. This is good news for those wanting to get out in the fields. This means warm temperatures. We're probably looking at a pretty decent stretch of temperatures for high temperatures being in the 60s and 70s, maybe even some places cracking the low 80s as we head toward April 15th. We also are looking at it probably being pretty dry as we head into the middle of April as well. So again, we probably really could use a shot of moisture in eastern Nebraska this weekend, and we probably will not have much rainfall for about 7 to 10 days after that. As we head into this is basically April 19th. So again, we are still probably going to be under the influence of ridging at that point. We are going to start paying attention to maybe some troughing moving into the western U.S. by then. That may give us a decent chance of moisture as we head into the latter portion of the month. In terms of where we've had precipitation recently, we had a good bit of moisture across portions of north central, northwestern Nebraska. Some of this actually came in the form of snow. We had a 7 to 8 inches of snow across portions of Cherry County earlier this week. That's mostly gone now. In terms of drought update, we did not see any changes on the drought monitor this week, and I don't necessarily anticipate enough moisture to move the needle for next week either, but we should get some moisture across places that are currently in drought. And this is where we currently are with soil moisture across the state. And those all-important soil temperatures have come up a good bit. They are mostly in the 40s across the state. Thanks, and back to you, Bryce.
All right, Eric, thank you very much for the update. We sure appreciate it. Finally, today we're going to be talking about a significant trend we're seeing. 2024 marked the third consecutive year of increasing rates for market value of agricultural land in Nebraska. According to the University of Nebraska Lincoln's 2024 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report, the now average value for ag land in the state climbed to more than $4,000 per acre. Joining us this week to discuss these values and the trends driving the increases is Nebraska Extension agricultural economist Jim Jansen. All right, we look at the 2024 figures. We're up another 5%, but you really got to look back on the past couple of years to tell the full picture here, don't we?
Right. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, we've had a very dynamic period in the farm real estate markets. Some say we might be at some degree of an inflection point, without a doubt, based on the survey results we've seen in the last couple of months here. The farm real estate market has been slowing down. We're still seeing an increase. 5% is definitely an increase, but we're seeing a period in time here where things are more moderated than what they were in the last 2 years. And some of the factors that have been reported to us have been those people that are looking to expand farms, the use of the 1031 tax exchange, higher livestock prices, somewhat limited high quality land sales. The volume of land sales may be slowing to some degree as well. And that would be expected given that we've seen a very high number of sales in recent years. Just with the higher prices, people are kind of reshuffling their things and looking at opportunities to capitalize on the higher prices. Livestock prices are much higher now, and at least the expectation for this fall is to be higher. And those are some of the major factors that have been somewhat bidded in to the market value of land across Nebraska here.
As part of your report, you do a statewide average of the price of ag land, and then you also break it out geographically. Let's talk about the state level, though. Where do we sit here, 2024?
Yeah, so we're up about 5% year over year. I believe the statewide all ag land value, which is an average across the different types of land we have reported in the survey, I believe the average came out to about $4,015 an acre or thereabouts. And the major land classes that were kind of dragging that average up a little bit higher, more so than the other ones, were the grazing land classes. Grazing land, tillable and non-tillable, hayland. That would be expected given the higher profitability we have in the livestock sector. Some of the things noted across the state that might be weighing down on the market, or some factors that might be guiding us into the future. Overall net farm income for the state of Nebraska, the expectations, while they're still fairly high, are much more moderated than they were compared to, let's say, last year. And also interest rates, whether it's interest rates for somebody that's renting land if they have to borrow money to make the cash rental rate payment, or interest rates in terms of financing a long-term loan contract. Those are definitely factors or features that are impacting the farm real estate market across Nebraska.
Talk about the different classes of land that saw some increases, but geographically speaking, did you see any notable things that jumped out to you this year as you look at those different breakdowns of the state?
Overall, we're up. We are seeing some pockets, in the northwest and southwest Nebraska. There were a few different land classes where we've seen some slippage, down a few percent. Overall, though, I would say across the state, we're seeing a situation where the prices are much more single-digit changes, whether up a little bit or down a little bit. In recent years, it had been up considerably, 30% over the last 2 years prior to this survey. So seeing a gradual change is what we like to see in the land market. Says land composes a very large portion of the balance sheet of many operations across the state.
Cash rental rates, that's something else you track year to year. What do you see this year?
So for the cash rents this year, we'll broadly group them into two categories. Let's say cropland. So cropland would include either irrigated and dry land cropland, and then grazing land, whether it's grazing land by the acre, cow-calf pair per month, things of that nature. Overall, cropland rates were mixed. Some areas were up slightly, some areas were down. Grazing land, whether they're by the acre or the cow-calf pair, we tended to see those trending up a little bit. I think the expectation, at least on the livestock side, our prices appear, I know there's been some changes this week, but prices for cow-calf pairs appear to be fairly strong, and the expectation appears to be fairly strong. The mixed results on the cropland side are probably attributed to lower expectations for the major commodities, corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever we might be raising across the state year.
All right, if people want to see this full report, you've got it online. What's the best website to do so?
Yeah, the website is cap.unl.edu/real estate.
It's always a fascinating report, so I appreciate you joining us here on Market Journal to break it down. Thanks for the time, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about this topic, your best course of action would be to visit the website cap.unl.edu. Of course, CAP standing for Center for Agricultural Profitability. Well, that about wraps up our time here on the broadcast this week, and what an enjoyable time it has been bringing you today's episode from the FFA convention. Now, I might be a bit biased, but I can't help but admire the power of this organization. These young adults, as you heard, are truly the future, and their excitement for the agriculture industry is evident. As for my bias, by the way, well, it stems from wearing one of those blue and gold jackets myself. A decade ago, I was one of those state FFA officers, and it was those very experiences that shaped me on the path that I'm on today, including having the honor of hosting this program. Thanks for joining us today. Hope to have you back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.